Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. There's an article here about polling and the absolute terrible state in which the Tories find themselves. And what we got this piece by Professor Sir John Curtice, a man well vested in the art of politics and of swing and of polling and so forth. And he's giving a very informed, experienced piece about the uphill task that the Tories have in order to try and salvage anything from this general election. And in fact, they basically can't. It could end up being their worst result ever, which would be horrendously bad. But we're going to take a look at it because it is interesting. And obviously, with Curtice, you know, you're getting the full story. And that's what he's doing. He's looking at the full story and he's going in with some depth on this. So hopefully it'll be an informative insight as to what's going on and what basically the Tories are facing. Oblivion. Anyway, let's take a look. Here goes. So John Curtice. Polls show the Tories have an electoral mountain to climb. Stack Everest 3 times. That's what they are. He says that there is much for them to fight for. Yeah. Survival. This is life and death for the Tory party now. We do not have to go far. We don't have to go back far to see what can happen to a prime minister who calls an election when his party is a long way behind in the polls. In 1997, John Major went to the country, albeit only a few weeks early, when his party was as much as 25 points behind Labour in the polls. And we saw a poll yesterday that showed just that, a 25% deficit. When the ballot boxes were opened 6 weeks later, the Conservatives ended up with just 165 seats, their lowest tally since 1906, and only half as many people as the party, half as many as the party won in 1992. Yeah, I mean, it was an unexpected victory. They ousted Thatcher, basically. Major struggled on for a couple of years, called an election, really wasn't expecting to win it, and then, weirdly, oddly, and out of nowhere, did. And then he struggled on until 1997. And then Labour, of course, trounced it, and you had the Messiah of Blair walking like Jesus through Jerusalem up to number 10. What a load of old bollocks it was. But the potential prospect facing Rishi Sunak is an even worse result than that. His party, currently 21 behind Labour in the latest polls, and not that pollsters agree on the exact size of the lead. In the past few weeks, the lead has ranged between 16 and 26 points. And of course, sometimes the polls either underestimate or overestimate the gap between the two parties. Even so, it's still behind. There is not one poll that puts the Tories even close. But they're not bound to be wrong this time. Indeed, their performance earlier this month, when they polled at various mayoral contests across England, was largely a creditable one. So it's at least possible that, on average, the polls are not far from the truth. That 21% Labour lead represents as much as a 16-point swing from Conservative to Labour since the last election. 16-point swing. That's enough to wipe out so many seats. It is just horrendous, isn't it? Meanwhile, the Lib Dems... I lost my place there, I apologise. Meanwhile, the Lib Dems are down a couple of points on 2019, and the implied swing from Conservative to Lib Democrat is more modest, 10%. Such figures in themselves point to heavy losses for the Conservatives, and if those swings were to be replicated in each and every constituency, and bearing in mind the polls in Scotland, the Conservatives would end up with 188 seats. Again, little more than half of what they won in 2019. Labour, with 357 seats, would enjoy a substantial majority of 64, while the Lib Dems would have 32 seats. Bigger than the SNP is expected to get. So they would swap around and the SNP would be down in the cheap seats, as it were. However, the electoral geography bequeathed by the 2019 election was especially favourable for the Conservatives. Labour piled up too many votes in safe seats, while the Conservatives won more seats by relatively narrow margins. At the same time, Boris Johnson's demolition of the Red Wall resulted in his party winning seats with fewer than average voters. This ensured the party received rich reward for its 12-point voting lead over Labour. Won't be happening this time, and a lot of the red walls that went blue will go straight back to red. Never possibly to be blue again in my lifetime. The problem for Mr Sunak is that his party will not necessarily enjoy the same advantage this time. Rather, he says there is a considerable evidence that it will not. And if Labour do prove to be 21 points ahead, the Tory tally could well be below that of 188 seats. And if it gets below 166, it will be the lowest ever. And it doesn't take much more of a swing. 1%, 2% could do it. First, the Conservatives are losing votes more heavily in places where they were previously strongest and thus have a seat to defend. That has been a repeated finding of recent MRP polls that they interview large numbers of voters in order to estimate the outcome in every seat. The pattern was also evident in both this year's and last year's local elections. This May, for example, the fall in Conservative support in those wards where it was previously strongest was 3 times that in places where it was previously relatively weak. And that's what they've got. They've got places where they were very, very strong is where they're finding their biggest falls. I suppose there's more people to fall from, number one, but also they are entirely not the Conservative Party anymore. They're so left-wing. They are blue socialists, aren't they? So he's keeping the keys to number 10 Downing Street. Looks like a tall order for Mr Sunak. Nevertheless, his MPs and candidates will be hoping he can narrow Labour's lead and limit the severe drubbing that could otherwise face his party. There is much for the Conservatives to fight for. Yeah, just not a victory. The victory's gone. What they need to do is cut the loss. And it's doubtful if they can even do that. Ho-hum. Coming up. It will be interesting to see on that Thursday night at 10 p.m. when the polls close, and the first thing they usually cut to is Curtice with his final poll. You know, the expected, the exit polls. They tend to be the most accurate ones, and that's where you know more or less straight away what the result will be. Now, the result itself is not up for question. We know it's going to be a Labour victory. It's how big a victory. Is it that big or is it that big? That's the only question, isn't it? We'll find out in due course. Anyway, we'll finish this one. Thank you very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment. Please share the video, and I will speak to you later. Bye.